Hi everyone, thank you for joining us in our Supporting Your Struggling Readers workshop. This is a 4-part workshop series. We're also going to have time after part 2 and part 4 for questions and answers. Today we are going to begin by sharing some information with you about structured literacy and some strategies that you can use at home. My name's Natalie. I am an educator with the Limestone District School Board. I teach in French and English. I also have received my Orton-Gillingham training, which is a training specific to support students with dyslexia.
And my name is Kim Lockhart. I am also an educator at the Limestone District School Board. I teach French immersion and I'm a student support teacher. I work specifically with students who are experiencing reading difficulties. And I too have my Orton-Gillingham training. And we look forward to sharing some of the strategies and tools and tips that we've learned in our Orton-Gillingham training with you today.
So we're going to get right started. We have lots of information and lots of ideas to share with you. So you're going to have some packed sessions with lots of ideas that you can use with your children either in the classroom or at home. So let's start off with, what is structured literacy?
So structured literacy is a term that was developed by the International Dyslexic Association, the IDA, and it was developed to include a number of evidence-based approaches to reading instruction. And some of the more familiar programs you may be familiar with include the Orton-Gillingham approach, Wilson, and Barton reading. Structured literacy is characterized as being diagnostic, explicit, systematic, and cumulative. And by that, it means children's learning needs are customized and the instruction is customized for each individual child in a very systematic way. Reading instruction includes a number of different elements, including oral sound development, which is spoken words, sound symbol recognition, which is matching the letter to its sound, syllable instruction, talking about the smaller parts of words, also talking about something called morphology, which is the base words, the prefixes, and the suffixes. And it also includes talking about grammar and sentence structure, and finally, comprehension and deriving meaning from print, from what we read. One of the most important features of structured literacy is the fact that it's multisensory. It includes visual, auditory, and kinesthetic stimuli, so that all of the different learning styles and all the different learning needs are met. And finally, structured literacy is effective for all learners. However, it is an absolutely necessary approach to help our students who have reading disabilities such as dyslexia.
So why do we want to use structured literacy? So approximately 20% of all students have a learning disability in reading, commonly dyslexia. Structured literacy approach is an approach that can help all students, including those with mild to severe reading disabilities. Current reading methods, such as whole language and balanced literacy, unfortunately do not meet the needs of dyslexic learners and of struggling readers. Those traditional methods of reading instruction include many strategies that you may have seen. You may have seen them come home on little bookmark cards with your children, or perhaps if you're an educator, you may even be sending these home with your students. So some of these methods include guessing the words, looking at the pictures, skip the word and move on. They also include thinking about words you know, or looking at the entire sentence and trying to sort of make sense of where the words are. The dilemma with those strategies is that they're only going to work for our competent readers. For our students that are struggling, these strategies are not going to be helpful for them. As we dive further deep into some of our strategies to help these readers, you will start to understand why some of these strategies are not helpful for them. So just to be clear, dyslexia is not a problem with reading. It is a problem with the way reading is taught. And I want to say that again, and I want to reiterate it for you. Dyslexia is not a problem with reading. It is a problem with the way reading is taught. And what that means is that if we are teaching students to read using an effective strategy, such as structured literacy, we are not going to see a large majority of students struggle with reading. We are going to reach almost all of our learners. Reading difficulties can be prevented using strategies such as structured literacy and approaches in all but a small percentage of children. So the estimates are about 3 to 5%. Currently, we're seeing about 30 to 40% of students struggling with reading with our balanced literacy and whole language approaches. For that reason, we really want to emphasize the importance of structured literacy. And the dilemma that we run into is that when we're not using strategies such as structured literacy, we end up with more students in remediation. So more students spending time with teachers like Kim with student support services. And this is time consuming and it's much more intense than in-class instruction. So by implementing structured literacy in kindergarten and primary classrooms, we're able to prevent remediation at later grades.
We want to talk to you a little bit too about some of the early warning signs that you may see either in your student in the classroom or your child at home. There are some early warning signs that may indicate your child could have future difficulties with reading or possibly dyslexia, a specific reading disability. So we will share with you some of the early warning signs, but the list is quite extensive. So these are some of the most common early warning signs that a child may have future difficulties with reading. And they can begin at a very early age, beginning at around 2 or 3, when some of the warning signs are evident. The first may be you may see a child have difficulty learning common nursery rhymes, such as Jack and Jill went up the hill. You may also notice that your child has difficulty learning and remembering the names of the letters in the alphabet. Also, when your child does start looking at printed letters, your child should be able to recognize some of the letters in his or her own name. And if your child doesn't recognize some of the letters in his or her own name, it doesn't necessarily mean your child will have dyslexia, but is definitely something to think about and to talk to your child's teacher about. Often articulation difficulties can be a component of or an early warning sign of dyslexia. So sometimes children mispronounce words or have difficulty with their speech, and we often refer to that as baby talk. So if a child is trying to say the word finger and says finger, or if your child is trying to say right and says white, for example, I broke my white arm. These are just some things that we want to make sure that you pay some attention to and get corrected and ensure that there is early remediation in articulation. Furthermore, if your child is having difficulties with rhyming patterns such as bat, cat, mat, that is something that you would want to work on. That's an early warning sign and something that you want to work with your child on before he or she is reading. And most importantly, dyslexia is a genetic learning disability. So if you have a family history of learning disabilities, that is another early warning sign that your child may also have some learning difficulties with reading. Now, structured literacy is an incredibly important part of reading instruction. And we, Natalie and I, strongly believe that many of the different behaviors and some of the mental health problems that we are seeing in our schools can be helped through a structured literacy reading program. So we want to share with you some of the social and maybe emotional implications that you may see at home when reading needs are not being met in the classroom. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of a list, and this is not an inclusive list, but they are some of the things that you may have seen as a teacher or you may see with your child as a parent at home. Some children who have difficulties reading may start to feel very anxious about going to school and may feel quite worried about not being able to keep up with their peers. Some children may start to feel ashamed or embarrassed when they're not catching on to reading at the same rate as their friends are in the classroom. And as they get older, they start to notice those things a little bit more. You may notice that your child starts to feel overwhelmed with the information that they're taking in at school, or overwhelmed with trying to keep up with the demands at school. And young children who aren't able to articulate how they're feeling may exhibit those emotions through tantrums at home. Also, children who have reading difficulties often come home from school particularly exhausted. It takes a lot more concentration and focus for children with reading disabilities to do the average work in the classroom. And so they may be particularly exhausted when they come home and be very reluctant to do some of the homework that is sent home. So, with that said, some children with reading difficulties may also have difficulty sleeping. So even though they come home particularly exhausted, they may have a hard time sleeping. And that could also be due to some anxiety about the difficulties that they're experiencing at school. One of the other social emotional implications that I often see as a student support teacher in the public system is students start to disengage from their learning. And sometimes this can be misinterpreted as being lazy. And children who are finding reading and writing and literacy activities particularly difficult, especially in the older grades, may be reluctant to engage because they don't want to embarrass themselves, or they have a fear of failure by trying. So they start to disengage so that they don't even have to run the risk of failing or feeling like they have failed. Furthermore, children may suffer from a very low self-esteem if they feel like they're not keeping up with their friends and their peers, and they may withdraw from regular preferred activities. So it's very important to make sure that we keep an eye on children's self-confidence and their self-esteem, and make sure that children don't start engaging in negative self-talk. We don't want to hear our children or our students say, I feel stupid, my friends are so much smarter than me. There are some misconceptions about dyslexia, and it is not a disability that has anything to do with intelligence. Children with dyslexia have average to above average intelligence. So we really want to make sure that children understand that a reading disability has nothing to do with how quote unquote smart they are, but it really is a different way of learning. So if your child starts to engage in negative self-talk, such as saying I'm stupid or everyone gets it but me, it's really important to have these conversations with your child and to explore further whether or not they do have a reading disability.
And for any of our educators out there that are watching this video, these are really great this is a really great list of behaviors that you can look for in students in your classroom. And a question that I always ask myself when a child is misbehaving is, why are they misbehaving? Behavior is a symptom of another issue, concern, or problem that's going on. And so we need to really ask ourselves, and we can do this as parents or as educators, what is causing the behavior? And when we start to look at what's causing the behavior, often we'll see that is a struggle with literacy or a struggle with another component of learning in the classroom. So we're going to move on now to the reading building blocks. And our next 3 workshops are going to touch on all of these components in different capacities, and we're going to give you the strategies that you can use at home or in your classroom to address the components of reading. So at the very base of our reading block, we have oral language. And so reading, even though it's looking at written words, always begins with oral language. So one of the first skills we want our students or children to recognize are, as Kim says, some of those, those rhyming sounds that we talked about, some of those early signs, those are ones that we're going to want to know. And those are all oral languages. So we're talking about listening and we're talking about speaking. And then we move on to phonemic awareness and phonics. We're going to share a few strategies with you in a minute. We then move on to fluency, vocabulary, and then at the very end, we get to comprehension, which is, of course, our ultimate goal of reading. We read to comprehend so that we can learn, so that we can explore the world, explore stories, and gain new information and knowledge. And so we need to be really clear that we start at the base. It really begins at the beginning. And often with students of dyslexia or reading difficulties, they've missed the base and no one has recognized that they've missed that base layer. And so then as a result, we're trying to move them up that ladder and we're trying to get them to fluency and we're trying to get them to comprehension, but they haven't even mastered oral language yet. And so that's where structured literacy and the strategies that we're going to teach you are really going to help you move up that ladder, those reading blocks, so that your child can achieve comprehension.
So the very beginning of the reading process begins with oral language, and all children, regardless of the language they speak, start with oral language. They are spoken to, they are sung to, they are read to. We have nursery rhymes. They hear oral language through television, through radio, through various media. And so developing that oral language skill is a fundamental aspect of the reading process because it helps children understand different vocabulary words. And so when they do start to read print, they can recognize whether or not a word is quote unquote a real word or if it isn't a real word and doesn't make sense. So some of the strategies we're going to share with you encompass something called phonological awareness. And there are a couple of terms that we want to share with you. And so when you hear the word phonological awareness, think of a telephone. Because when we speak on the telephone, it is strictly sound. So the word phone means sound. So phonological awareness refers to the sounds of words, only oral language. There are 5 different elements to phonological awareness. Those are rhyming, sentence segmentation, which is counting words, syllables, counting the syllables in words, onsets and rhymes, which is blending and segmenting, as well as phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is actually talking about the individual units of sound in a word. So we're not talking about letters, we're not talking about print, we're only talking about the sounds that you hear in a word. And we'll give you some examples, but there are 3 components of phonemic awareness, and those are sound isolation, isolating individual sounds in a word. For example, cat, k, a, t. There are 3 sounds in the word cat. The word fish, f, I, sh. There are 4 letters, but there are only 3 sounds. So it's really important that children understand that words are units of sound. Furthermore, the blending of sounds. So it is the opposite of segmenting. If we blend sounds, it's an example like when we sound out words in the early reading process. So blending sounds might be b, a, g. If we blend those sounds together, they make the word bug. And then finally, the most complex of the phonemic awareness skill is sound manipulation. And sound manipulation is quite a complex skill that usually is developed at the later stages of the phonological awareness process. So sound manipulation includes adding sounds. For example, if I say the word bug and I add s, what word is that? Bugs. It's also sound deletion. So if I say the word bat and I don't say b, the word left is at. And it's also sound or word manipulation. So by taking a letter sound, deleting it from a word and adding a new sound instead. For example, if I say the word mat and you say it again, but you don't say you say k, what word is that? Cat. But that's the initial sounds. And then you can also manipulate words using in middle and ending sounds. For example, if I say the word boat and you don't say t and you say n, what word does it create? And the word is bone. So many of us who are competent readers know that those words are spelled differently, and that boat is B-O-A-T and bone is B-O-N-E. But again, we're not talking about print, we're only speaking about sounds. So that is a complex skill that will definitely help your child with their early reading skills.
The key with phonological awareness skills is that before students or children move to the next level, they need to have mastered their phonological awareness skills. For our readers that are competent and that follow the typical pattern, those skills are less important because they're going to move on and they're going to catch on those skills really easily. For our readers that are struggling with dyslexia or just with reading difficulties, they need to have mastered those skills. And what that means is that they need to be automatic. And Dr. Kilpatrick, who is an expert in the field and who has created a wonderful phonological awareness skills test, it's called the PAST, P.A.S.T. We will share that link with you. He has developed a phonological awareness skills test whereby there are two different stages. One, the child has completed the skill, so they know how to manipulate the sounds, isolate the sounds, blend the sounds. That's one component. So the first is that they know how to do it. The second component is that it's automatic. So developing that automaticity is critical, because if we don't develop the automaticity in phonological awareness, you end up with readers. And I have 3 children with dyslexia or difficulties reading. And so I've seen this, and you may have seen it as well, either with your own children or with students in your classroom, where they're spending so much time decoding the words. So they're trying to pronounce the sounds in the words that they're not reaching fluency or comprehension. So they're reading their books and they're going b, at, bat, is, and they're reading very slowly. And that's because they have not developed the automaticity. And automaticity is key. So with our phonological awareness skills, we don't want them to just be able to do it. We want them to be able to do it quickly. In Dr. Kilpatrick's test, he asked for 2 seconds. So children need to be able to complete the task, the ones that Kim just mentioned, all of those examples, within 2 seconds to be automatic. And once they've mastered that, then they can move on to the next stage. If they have not, and they have dyslexia or a reading difficulty, their reading will not be fluent and they will not be comprehending what they're reading. And as a result, when they get to later grades, we see even more difficulties.
So we are going to share with you now a few examples that you can do and use at home or in the classroom to help develop your child's phonological awareness skills. And the most important thing as a teacher and as a parent is to keep it fun and light. Reading, when you become a competent reader, it's fun. It should be fun. And at the end of the day, we all want all our children to enjoy reading and become lifelong readers. So by keeping it light and fun, and we're both big believers in quality of time, not quantity of time. So even 5 to 10 minutes a day of phonological awareness practice, phonemic awareness practice will make a huge difference in the long run. So we don't need to carve out an hour of our day to be working on these things. And also it's really important to do these things on the go as well. We're all busy parents, busy teachers. And so a lot of the activities we want to share with you today can be done on the bus, on your way to the shopping mall, or on your way to the grocery store, or in the car on a long car ride. So these are things that don't have to necessarily be done at the kitchen table, but there's some activities that can be done on the go as well. We've tried to incorporate some activities that can be done outside too, because it is summertime and we want to maximize this wonderful weather we're having. So some of the activities we've given you can be easily done outside as well. So the first phonological awareness skill that we're going to focus on is syllable awareness. And syllables are parts of words that are characterized by having one vowel sound in them. So the first activity that I often share with my students is counting the syllables in words. And typically, teachers and parents and other educators may use the traditional approach of clapping the syllables. However, it has been shown that only children who understand what a syllable is can competently clap a syllable. For example, if I say the word pizza, a child who doesn't understand what a syllable is may go pizza or pizza. So an effective way to teach syllables is by putting your hand under your chin and asking the child to repeat the word after you in an exaggerated way. Again, I'm going to use the example pizza. So exaggerating the word pizza, how many times does your chin hit your hand? Let's try it. Pizza. Our chin hits our hand twice. Each vowel that is each vowel sound causes the mouth to open, whereas the consonants do not cause the mouth to open so much. So I'm going to give another example. Cat. Do it with me. Cat. So our chin hits our hand once. So there's one syllable in the word cat. Now we're going to try another word. Butterfly. Do it together. Butterfly. Our chin hits our hand 3 times. So that is a really great way to introduce counting syllables. Once the child has understood and mastered the ability to count syllables, then you can start clapping. But clapping really does only work if the child understands what a syllable is. So what's a fun way that you can practice this skill at home? Music. In our family, we try and incorporate music and singing and dance when we can. So I have a couple of little musical instruments with me. We've got a tambourine, we've got a shaker. So one thing that you can do at home is you can find a song that everybody knows well and sing it. And you're not going to tap the words that you hear, but we're going to musically tap the syllables. And we're going to do one little line of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So we're not going to sing it all together, but we're going to tap the syllables in Twinkle, Twinkle, like this. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. And we'll stop. So the word twinkle, if you ask the child to be twinkle, 2 syllables. Star, star, just 1 syllable. So that is a different way to practice syllables, and maybe a little bit more of a fun way to practice syllables. A great outdoor activity that you can do with some simple sidewalk chalk, draw a hopscotch on your driveway or on a sidewalk. And rather than throwing the stone, say a word and have your child hop the syllables, the number of syllables in the word. For example, if the word is pizza, your child would count the syllables in the word pizza and then jump to number 2. And then you might say dog, and your child would jump 1. If your child jumps 2, you say, ooh, let's try that again, and try dog. And then they would move back to the previous square. So, and then the goal would be to get to 10, of course. So once they get to 10, that means they've counted 10 syllables. And so that's a fun way to practice syllables, and it can be done outside on a sunny day.
For older children, you could do skipping. Because sometimes a lot of these activities are geared towards younger children, but we do have a lot of students, especially in dyslexia, that reach grade 3, 4, 5, 6, that have not mastered their phonological awareness skills, which is why they're still struggling with reading. And so you can skip syllables as well for older students if they're not interested in hopscotching.
Yes. So the next phonological awareness skill that we're going to give you some activities to practice at home is rhyming. And rhyming is an incredibly important skill for children to have because it helps them to notice patterns in words. And when we get to reading and spelling, then children will start to notice certain patterns in words. And structured literacy will bring awareness to children about the different patterns in words to help them recognize words with similar patterns. So one of the first and most traditional ways of teaching rhyming is through good old Dr. Seuss. So a lot of us have Dr. Seuss books, and they're also available at the Kingston Public Libraries. There's a great selection, and I've chosen Dr. Seuss's One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. And the way you would share this with your child to practice the rhyming skills is you might read a pair of lines, and you would have your child guess what the next word would be based on the rhyming pattern. For example, from there to here, from here to there, funny things are...
And we're not looking for the right answer, so I could say everywhere. Funny things are pear, funny things are bear. So we're not necessarily looking, because we don't want our child, we talked earlier about guessing, so we don't want our children guessing when they're trying to read, but this is a rhyming activity, so we want them guessing a word that rhymes, does not have to follow what's in the book.
And this is a perfect example because Dr. Seuss has a lot of words that we call nonsense words, which are excellent for structured literacy because we're not focusing on understanding the meaning, but we're only focusing on decoding the words. So this is an example of using nonsense words for rhyming activities. We know a man called Mr. Gump. Mr. Gump has 7 hump wump. So if you like to go bump bump, just jump on the hump of Mr. and
Gump, swump,
lump,
lump,
pump,
pump, stump, plump.
So Dr. Seuss is a very traditional way. He was a genius when it came to teaching kids about rhyming. And so really go back to those more traditional ways.
If you're working on rhyming as well, Don't be focused on that they're creating a real word. As Kim said, nonsense words are completely fine for rhyming because you know that they're picking up the skill, even if they're making up a word. We're looking for skill development, not accuracy, when we're talking about the rhyming and phonological skills. So we want to know that they know the skill, not that they've perfected the vocabulary or any of the more advanced skills.
What you really want them to recognize is that the last three letters of WUMP and GUMP are UMP. So really that is the learning that's taking place. Do they recognize the pattern in the word? Whether or not the consonant at the beginning of the word, that is not important. What we want them to understand is that there is a pattern, and that helps them with their rhyming skills. Another fun activity that you can play on the go or at home is good old Simon Says. So my kids and I, when they were younger, would often play Simon Says to keep them busy in the car on long car rides. So I would say, sometimes I'd say Mom Says, but Simon says, touch a part on your body that rhymes with rose. And so they would have to think about their body parts, and hopefully they would touch nose. Now, Simon says, touch a body part that rhymes with south. Mouth. And you'd want them to say the word too, just to make sure they're not thinking lips. You want to make sure that they say the sound to make sure that they understand the rhyming words. Touch something that rhymes with flea. Knee. So that can be a variation of a Simon Says game. And the third part of the phonological awareness is word counting. And word counting is simply understanding that words make up sentences and that sentences are composed of words. So this is a fairly simple activity. You would maybe take a sentence out of a familiar book, or maybe you would just make up a sentence as you're walking down the street. For example, the tree is green. How many words are in the sentence, the tree is green? Let's count them together. The tree is green. And that one's a fairly easy one because each word has one syllable. The tree is green. But often you'll hear kids go, the tree is green. So we want to make sure that they understand the word the, even though they might not be familiar with the fact that it's a word, but the is a word with its own unit of meaning, and is also a word. So the tree is green. Now we're going to try another one. The strawberries are red. Let's count it together. The strawberries are red. Now that one might be a little bit more difficult because if you've talked about syllables, they might count strawberries as two words. So you want to talk about the fact that that the word strawberries is actually a singular word. Same with butterfly. Butterfly is a compound word, but we want them to understand that the word butterfly is one word, but may have multiple syllables.
And it's really important that while you're doing these activities, and one of the really beneficial parts of the activities we showed you is that they are multisensory. So when we just did our example of reading the words, we're using our hands to show the words. So we're not just asking them to think about it in their head. We want them to be using other body parts while they're doing it so that they're getting that multi-sensory. The hopscotching, they're jumping, the music, they're shaking, Simon Says, they're touching their body parts, and that's critical. Our students with dyslexia or who are struggling to read need that multi-sensory approach. We can't just have them doing, using one of those senses. We can't just have them listening and speaking back. We want them to use their body when they're participating in activities.
So now we're going to move on to phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness does fall under the umbrella of phonological awareness. The difference is phonological awareness is the individual's or the student's ability to recognize the sound structure of words and oral language, whereas phonemic awareness is talking about the individual sounds in words. So there are three skills under the umbrella of phonemic awareness. Four skills under the umbrella of phonemic awareness. The first one is sound isolation. So I'm going to say a word to Natalie, and Natalie is going to count the sounds that she hears in this one word. We're going to start with something simple, the word bat. Can you count the sounds in the word bat using your fingers?
B-a-t.
How many sounds do you hear?
3.
Excellent. Now I'm going to give you one that's a little bit more challenging. It's the word fish. How many sounds do you hear in the word fish?
Sh.
Excellent. 3 sounds in the word fish. Again, we're just listening for sounds. We're not looking at letters. So another activity you can ask is, what sound do you hear at the beginning of the word rat? Excellent. What sound do you hear at the end of the word boat? Excellent. Now, what sound do you hear in the middle? What is the middle sound you hear in the word rug? So she just identified the beginning, the middle, and the end sounds in words. And I gave very simple, mostly 3-letter words just to demonstrate the example. The next skill under the umbrella of phonemic awareness, which is sound manipulation, is segmenting sounds. So we want the child to be able to pull the sounds apart in a word. So I'm going to give Natalie a word, and she's going to segment the sounds to try and isolate them. So Natalie, can you please tell me, segment the sounds in the word plant?
And
Plant. Now, can you segment the sounds in the word leg?
egg.
So she's just pulled those sounds apart. So if you think about spelling, when you spell a word, you're actually segmenting it into its individual sounds. So that's what we were practicing. Now, blending sounds together is what is used in the reading process. So I'm going to give Natalie 3 sounds, and we're going to use a strategy called tap, tap, slide. And so have your child put out his or her arm, and you're going to have the initial or the first sound on the shoulder, the middle sound at the elbow, and the last sound by the wrist. So I'm going to give you 3 sounds, and I want you to blend the sounds together, Natalie. So I'm going to give you the sounds d, a, g. Can you blend those sounds?
So I would first go d, a, g, d, a, g, dog.
Very good. She did an excellent job blending those sounds. Now we're going to try a different word, the word, oh, I can't say the word, sorry. D, a, k.
D, a, k, d, a, k, duck.
Right, so she did it 3 times. The first time she modeled what I did, she copied what I did. The next time she did it a little bit faster, and then finally she was able to slide the sounds together to form the word. Now, some students might need a lot of practice with this because it is a little bit more challenging, especially for some students who may have dyslexia. Sometimes the last sound they hear is the sound they want to start with. For example, sometimes I may go t, a, b, and they might go
bat.
Bat. And so we want to make sure that we slow them down and do it in a very methodical way. B, a, t. I think I said, sorry, t, a, b. And so we want them to go t, a, b, tab. So you want to practice that frequently with your child to make sure that they have mastered that skill.
And you may need to model this multiple times. This is something that you may be working on with a child or a student potentially for a month. It's going to depend on how quickly they pick it up, and different students will pick it up differently. I'm currently working with my own child, and we've been working on blending. She's almost 6, and we've been working on it for months, and she still has not mastered the skill. So sometimes she can do it, other times she can't. And I want her to be able to do it so that she's mastered it, so that every time she can blend that sound in 2 seconds. So when I did it the first time, if I go b, at, that's not automatic. Bat, automatic. So I will continue to practice and I will continue to model. So I will give her examples. So I will go bus, bus, and I will blend them and model them, and we will continue to work on that skill until she has mastered it. Different words over and over again. And Kim's going to give you another couple ways that you can do instead of necessarily doing the tap slide, because as we said, we have different learners, and this may work really well for some of our learners and this may not work so well for others.
Well, and we also want to make sure that before we move on to the next stage, which is phonics, which is introducing the sounds to letters, that the child is able to master the skills just orally. Because in our next session, we're going to talk about matching those letters to print. So we really want to make sure that we're not adding on an extra layer until that first layer is mastered. As Natalie said, another strategy, if the tap slide isn't working, sometimes using cubes or colored chips will help a child with the blending. So we don't want to introduce letters at this point, but using colored chips that the child can slide on the table can definitely help. And then later on, we will introduce the cards and how we slide the sounds together with the cards.
Yeah, and you can use papers too. So you don't have to have you could use rocks, you could use pine cones, anything. So they're sliding. So instead of using their hand, they're just going b, at, bat, and sliding the papers together.
It's easier on the table when you can slide them than it is holding them in the air.
So they would slide them, they would use rocks and they could slide them together, pine cones, whatever they want to use. If they love Lego, they can use any of those and slide them together.
Now, the last element of phonemic awareness is manipulating sounds. And this is a more complex skill that some children can do quite easily. And others have quite a bit of difficulty doing it. And that's okay. Some kids just need a little bit more time and a little bit more practice. So as I mentioned earlier, manipulating words is, there are three aspects to it. And the first one is sound deletion. So I'm going to practice with Natalie a sound deletion task. So I'm going to ask her to repeat a word after me and then delete the beginning sound. For example, Natalie, can you say the word cat?
Cat.
Say it again without k.
At.
Well done. Now say the word boat.
Boat.
Say it again, but don't say b.
Oat.
So she was able to hear the words and take off the beginning sound. A little bit more difficult than the beginning sounds are the ending sounds. So I'm going to do the same task, but I'm going to ask her to delete the ending sound. So Natalie, can you please say the word plant?
Plant.
Can you say it again, but don't say t?
Plan.
Well done. Now can you say the word bone?
Bone.
Say it again, but don't say n.
Bow.
Well done. She did a very good job. And of course, because we're competent readers, many of us are probably spelling the words in our head right now. But really what we want is the child just to work with the oral language, just the sounds that they hear. Now, what is even more difficult and more challenging than working with the initial and ending sounds are the middle sounds. So, I'm going to give Natalie a word and I'm going to ask her to repeat the word, deleting one sound and adding another in its place. For example, say pin.
Pin.
Now, instead of I, say ah.
Pan.
Great job. Now we're going to do the same activity, but we're going to do a deletion and addition task for the beginning sounds. So
I'm going to make a mistake so you can see what we do when we make a mistake.
Can you say the word dog?
Dog.
Now you're going to say it again, but not say duh. You're going to say
Mog.
Ooh, good try, Natalie. That was a really good attempt. Let's try it again, but we're going to try saying it, and you're going to repeat after me the first sound. So again, say the word dog, and try it saying it without the d.
Dog.
We're going to try that again. Say dog, but don't say d.
Og.
Well done. Now I've asked you to say the sound at the beginning of that word.
Fog.
And if Natalie did a great job. Well done, Natalie. But if the child's having difficulties, maybe it's difficulties again with the segmenting and blending of sounds. So when Natalie did dog and then she didn't say fog, that could be because maybe she hasn't mastered the blending and the segmenting of sounds yet. So we can always backpedal a little bit and work on some of those other skills that we had previously practiced. And then last but not least, manipulating words also includes deletion tasks for final sounds. So Natalie, could you please say the word bone?
Bone.
Can you say it again, but don't say n, say t.
Boat.
Well done. So those are the 4 different phonemic awareness activities that are really a crucial and essential skill and the foundation to the reading process.
So that pretty much sums up our time for today. We have taken a lot of your time today, and we are going to next week touch on one of the main elements of structured literacy and one of the main components that's going to help you be able to start to work with your children with the sounds and then the letters that represent those sounds. And when we get to that, we're going to be working with something called a code pack, which we will introduce next week. At the end of our session next week, we will have a question and answer where you will be able to ask us questions based on the first 2 videos. So we're really excited for you to join us next time, and we look forward to seeing you in our live question and answer at the end of our second session. Thank you.
Thank you.